That being said, there's a couple of things, and I've really been struggling with this concept of how do we get people prepared for disasters, and it's even though it's one job, one section of what we do as emergency managers. I honestly think it's one of the most important portions of what we do as emergency managers, and even as public servants, because if you can get the more people you can get prepared, the less impact the disaster has on the community as a whole. And we make fun, and it's just the part that I always struggle with a little bit. We tell people to be prepared, and then we teach community preparedness classes like CERT programs and things like this, BERT, NERT, Panda. I forget what it stands. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different programs that are out there, and you go through these and you teach these people to be prepared, and then we then um the Doomsday Prepper show comes on. I don't know if you guys have watched any of those or not. And yes, the people who decide to be on TV, they're probably a little bit odd, or at least attention seeking at the minimum. And then the other side of it too is the media, the TV program, the producers, I guess, they're looking to make it entertaining, and so there's a little bit of TV razzle dazzle put to it. So that being said, so we make fun of them. All right, we go, oh, are you a prepper? Mark, are you a prepper? Because you're a preparedness guy. Are you a prepper? It gives us like negative connotation to it. And there used to be like survivalists, right? Oh, the survivalists. The guys that are living off of beans and rice, that are living in the woods, and that was bad. And then they changed the name to prepper. And I don't know if what they're changing the name to now is, and it just seems to move along the way. But the idea is I would almost rather have a whole community full of preppers, if you will, for lack of a better term, than a whole bunch of people that aren't prepared at all. Right? Which one, if you had to choose between two, right? As an emergency manager, or even as a chief of police, like which one would you rather deal with? Now, outside the craziness of the conspiracy theory and all that crap, I'm not talking about that stuff. But the idea of people having food and water and toilet paper, because God knows we need toilet paper for every disaster now, because that seems to be the thing. All those things, boxed up somewhere, hoarding food or whatever. Don't you think that they're going to fare better after a disaster strikes? Hurricane Sandy came through, and what did we see on TV in New York City? We saw people that didn't have food that were going and eating out of a 7-Eleven dumpster because they were dumping the food out of there that they couldn't sell. Right? This is not like, I'm not making fun of anybody, but these aren't, the people that are, living in the bad part of town necessarily. Right? These are like the, Upper West Side, people that have money. They couldn't, their ATMs didn't work, and blah, 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 blah. Power went down. They didn't have cash. Right. And so they're eating out of a dumpster. So again, who's worse off, right? Because now, what is our moral and legal obligation to these people, right? I mean, can the New York City's 10 million people, right? About, right? So anybody out there, even let's take New York City out of it. Let's bring the smallest county, land wise, maybe the largest population. Orange County has 3.5 million people in it. How can we feed for 3, 4, 5 days 3.5 million people? Can we do it? It's impossible, right? There's not enough manpower and personnel power and food out there. I have to learn to speak in non-gender roles, so I'm still learning. I'm an old guy. I'm an old man. Please forgive my old talk. So personnel power, right? Staffing. How do we do this? Right? We don't have enough staffing to do it. Right? We don't have enough food to cook, to do that. Right? So encouraging communities to be prepared. And so if we want to take away the silliness, if you will, of the concept of being a prepper, right, or that, or the stigma that goes along with this, so we talk about the concept of being a resilient community, and I think you guys might have seen my TED talk on the resiliency, and I really believe in the concept of resiliency, right, of coming together and knowing that, okay, how do we rebuild and bring things back, and I've been searching that for a bit and kind of thinking about that for a bit and chewing on it, and then I came across Nassan Taleb's book called Anti-Fragile. He's the guy, same guy that wrote the book Black Swan, right? And so in Anti-Fragile, again, he's more talking about the economic aspect of things, and it's funny though because like he's if you read the book, you better have thick skin because I don't think there's anybody in here that you read that you go, oh man, he's not kind of bashing you a little bit. He makes fun of economists because he feels it's a pseudoscience, but yet he's, that's the world he lives in. He works in, he worked in the finance district, right? But the thing is, what he's saying specifically about the economist is that a lot of them are just academics, right? And they don't put anything to practical, and they don't have any skin in the game, for lack of a better term. So that's why he kind of bashes them, for lack of a better term. So anyway, throughout the book, he talks about, the idea of people having skin in the game, people having to do things to make themselves robust. And so the idea of robustness then moves into what systems can you produce that when they get stressed, instead of breaking, right, they become stronger. So what systems can you produce that instead of breaking, they become stronger? So an example of that is when we're talking about 5G now, and mesh networking, and the way this works together is that when you have more people on the system, right, especially like on the mesh networking portion of it, when you have more people on the system, the phones actually work better instead of failing. I guys told you the story about what happened when our phone system failed in Seal Beach. So that's the difference, right? So something that's robust, that's able to actually expand to become better, and somebody was talking about the idea of a robust cell phone, which would be like something that, you drop it from the from an airplane or whatever, you drop it from a significant height and it doesn't break. And then they said, well, that could be something that's resistant, but a robust one would be once you drop it from that height, it charges back up to 100%. You know what I mean? So that's the concept of the anti-fragile, the robustness that we're looking for. And so then my challenge here is we take a look at the 100 resilient cities that the Rockefeller Foundation had out for a while. Now they abandoned that program for whatever reasons, political reasons, basically money. But so the 100 cities of resilient cities program, which I thought was really interesting, and I was really following that for a bit. But the thing is do we want to make our cities resilient, which means like after the disaster occurs that we can bring them back to where they were before? Right. So we talked about this before with the idea of using zones and using building codes to improve, right, people's ability to return to normal, if you will, after a disaster. We talked about the idea that we have buildings that in certain areas that flood a lot, that they put them up already on stilts, right, knowing that the floods are going to come, so they put them up on a I don't know, 16-foot stilt or whatever it is, right, so that the flood water would come underneath them. There's a house that was in Mexico Beach, Florida, that was overbuilt. Some doctor built it, and when the hurricane came through and blasted most of Mexico Beach, everything, I think every house except for 2 or 3 survived, and the 2 or 3 homes that survived were this doctor's home, right, that he built this thing, overbuilt it, and the homes that were behind the doctor's home that didn't get hit by the winds. That's a resilient, that's a robust build, right? I mean, think about that. That one house was built and the homes behind it survived because of the way that one guy built his house. Now, of course, it's going to take more money to do these things. It's economically, disadvantaged for some, right, to have it happen. But maybe this is something that, as a community, as a group that comes together, that we might want to invest in, because at the end of the day, if that occurs, right, if we could build that robust city, if we could rebuild buildings that are going to withstand earthquake or fire or those things, right, what happens is across the whole entire community, things occur which is economically good for everybody, such as lower insurance rates and things like this if everybody participates in it. So that's the idea of building the robust community outside of just a resilient community, is what can we do to incorporate these ideas of Taleb's anti-fragile into a community and make them stronger and make them thrive after a disaster. A friend of mine jokes with me all the time, teases me, if you will, about the idea when I say thriving after disaster, making it sound like, oh, you're going to, the disaster comes in and it makes you either better or richer or stronger. And I go, yes, absolutely. Right? Absolutely. If you can have a disaster that comes in and it makes your economy better, why not? Right? We're sitting here in a pandemic right now, and you're looking at in California, for those of you that aren't out here, we just shut down the entire state again today, right? You're seeing people that aren't able to go to work, and you know, what can they do to be financially and economically robust? So they're relying upon a paycheck, right? And I have a couple of friends, I have a handful of friends that work for Disney Corporation, and a bunch of them lost their job, right? They were in the hotel industry. One of them was the emergency manager for Disneyland, and they cut those positions, right? Which is kind of odd, but that is what it is. So we think about people specifically going into that 9 to 5, working for a company, whatever it is, and that's where they get their money from, and that's their economic engine. Now, whether we could talk about financial robustness and the idea of making sure that your bills are paid, that they don't take out lots of credit, but that's not the American way, right? That's just, if you take a look at it, I mean, even the United States, we take out a lot of credit on things. China owns most of our debt, right? So we could talk about that, and that's important. And insurance, proper insurance, is very important. And we talk about the financial robustness specifically associated with that. But if you take a look at, and I'm not pointing fingers because I'm just as guilty as everybody, but you take a look at the jobs that are out there today, and I think, and Brian and Mark and you guys are kind of probably along my side of things. We grew up at a time that says you go get a job working for X corporation, you work there for 25 years, you retire, you get the golden watch, and you get a pension, and you're on your way to living a great life, right? But however, I think the millennials have it right in the sense of staying in a job for a few years, get the information they can, and moving on to the next job, and increasing their monetary value and also their skill set as they go up. Right. But also, I think that the idea of having jobs in multiple different arenas might actually be better. Right. So if one portion of your job goes away, you still have other income coming in. So those that diverse themselves by going, like my next door neighbor, and I tease him a lot, but he's a pharmacist, right? Young guy. I think he's like 28, 9 years old, something like that. He's a pharmacist, has a nice family, and he works in Seal Beach, and on his way home from Seal Beach, he'll pick up DoorDash, and he doesn't need the money, right? But he picks up DoorDash. But think about that, right? Think about the idea that he already has established, and so then if something goes sideways, economically speaking, he has more money coming in. He's not relying upon one organization to make his money. So if we can appreciate that idea of being able to do this economically speaking, of having multiple small jobs, being able to bring in the same amount of money, maybe it's a different lifestyle or something like that. But that's something that's robust, right? Taleb talks about in his book the idea that he talks about these brothers. I don't know if these are real people or not, but whatever, for the sake of the book, it makes sense, right? So these two brothers, one's a banker and one's a taxi driver, right? And the taxi driver makes about the same amount of money as the banker does, but he works more hours, blah blah blah, right? And so he in the story, the banker they become 50 years old, and the banker loses his job to a younger person and can't find another job, right? And so in this case, though, the taxi driver is still able to make the same amount of money through over the years. And so I guess the banker, in one sense, made the money quicker, but the taxi driver is able to keep the money coming for many years. And so the idea of choosing and doing something that is anti-fragile when it comes to your employment, we don't teach that to anybody. I mean, I didn't get taught that when I was in school. So I think creating that space for people to be able to think that way, and maybe even as emergency managers, that we encourage that type of thinking, right? And encourage the idea of community. Now, I come from a small town outside of a small city, right? Go over by Katie. She grew up in the same area, right? And we have volunteer fire departments, and we have these community parades and all this kind of stuff. And the sense of community seems to be very stronger with those areas, right? The volunteer firefighters have the parades, and they have beautiful fire trucks because they don't have to pay any money, so they get like really nice equipment. But you go there, and it's a lifestyle. It isn't a it's not a job. It's not a job at all, right? No one's getting paid. But the idea here is that the community revolves around those organizations that were there. We talked about, we didn't talk about it in this class, but in the next class, we're going to talk about the book called Bowling Alone, or those of you that were in that class. All right. And the idea of joining, right? And the idea of being part of small groups such as the Elks Clubs and the bowling leagues and things like this, which brought the sense of community together. When I was a kid, I got in trouble one time, and I didn't get in trouble by the police department necessarily, although the lieutenant knew my dad, and I was already in trouble. This is before cell phones, everybody, and before I got home, my dad already knew what I did. You know what I mean? Because they knew me, and so it's just like when you're walking, I was, oh, what happened? Oh, nothing. I got a flat tire. Oh, were you racing your car? No, Dad. Oh, that's not what Lieutenant Cox said. Ah, crap. So that's that sense, right, of the of everybody kind of knowing. And then back, if you think about cities, right, cities like New York City and Boston and Philadelphia, they had, even though they were large cities even at that time, they had beat cops that worked and walked the neighborhoods, right? And if you ever seen the movie, the TV show, yeah, the movie West Side Story, right? Everybody knew that one officer who was walking around, and he knew all the kids in the neighborhood, right, and what they're up to. And so maybe the idea of robustness comes into the idea of breaking things down into smaller bits than it is to having that large piece, right? To where the community gets to know each other, and you're shopping again locally. You're not focusing on the idea of having the big Walmarts and Targets and stuff like this, but you're back to using the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. Maybe that's what robustness really is. Maybe that's what communities really, because at the end of the day, when we have a disaster, if you know who the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker is, right, it's a lot easier for them to come out and help your neighbor than it is for the person who's the CEO of Walmart, who doesn't even know how many people live in the community that they're serving. Now, I'm not against these buildings. I'm very much a capitalist when it comes to things, so I'm not against that stuff. But I'm just using this as examples of maybe smaller is better. Maybe the artisan is better than the factory made stuff that we're making over and overseas. Maybe that is the answer to what I've been searching for the idea of making a community prepared. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I just have a lot of thoughts. Right? I put them down on paper. And because I have thoughts, I put them down on paper. People tend to listen to what I'm saying. But the idea here is what does it mean? What does it mean to have a prepared community? What does it mean to have a robust community? What does it mean to have an anti-fragile community? And I think as emergency managers at the end of the day, I think as public servants at the end of the day, I think as people who care for their fellow humanity at the end of the day, person frenzy, sorry about that. Right? What does it mean? right? I think we have gotten to the point to where we shut ourselves in and we don't know our neighbors necessarily. We might wave to them, right? No one's changing, no one's exchanging, casseroles at the end of the street or whatever that is, the community barbecues and stuff like this. Maybe we should do more of that. When I was at Seal Beach, we created a program called Neighbor for Neighbor. And the idea for neighbor was, instead of doing the typical neighborhood watch type of stuff, and Brian and I talked about this before, where you come in and you sit down with this, when the crime is going on, everybody wants the neighborhood watch to go on. And then, like, when the crime spree goes away and, everybody's good, it's like you and the host and a bunch of cookies. All right. And I mean, literally, there's like 24 cookies. You're like, oh my gosh, you know? So the idea for the neighbor for neighbor is, instead of just doing disaster, instead of doing criminal watch, which is part of it actually, right? But you do disaster preparedness. What skills do you have, Thaddeus, that could help out during a disaster? What skills does Mark have? What skills does Katie have? Right? And you sit there and you talk about this over barbecue and potluck, and the fire trucks come and the police cars come, and we have, the police chief comes out and says a little word, and the fire chief comes out and says a few things. But at the end of the day, when you walk away from this, when you as the emergency manager walks away from the program, you are introducing neighbors to each other. You're introducing and you're developing small, autonomous little disaster response teams in each neighborhood that are going to start looking out for each other. And it doesn't have to be the big disaster. Doesn't have to be the big fire. It doesn't have to be the big earthquake, right? A disaster could be something as simple as the fact that, I don't know, Brian's plumbing goes out and he doesn't know how to fix it, but Michael happens to be a plumber and he can come over in the middle of the night and say, hey, Brian, I'm your neighbor. Let me help you fix it. Right? The little lady down the street needs to get to the hospital or to the doctor appointment. She doesn't have a car, but Anthony's good enough to take her down to the car, take her down to the appointment. And then Elizabeth can go check on her after the next day. That's what it is about to be the community. And that's what's taking that big picture, right? The big 10 million people, the 3.5 million people that live in Orange County, and break it down into street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, and create the resilience and the robustness of disaster preparedness. And that's what I truly believe at the end of the day is, as emergency managers and public safety servants, that's what we should be aiming for, is to be able to break things down to that level. Well, everybody, I want to thank you so much for being part of my class here. I love this class. This is one of my favorite ones to teach. And I just, and everybody here that participated here, especially everybody who came on these classes, in our little Zoom classes, it was great to connect with everybody, especially during this COVID time. We got to see Elizabeth from all the way over in Boston, and the rest of us over here on the West Coast, and Mark from up north, and I don't know, Anthony, you're just in LA with your Christmas boxes behind you, so right. But it's great. It was really was. And if you guys have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. You guys have my contact information, my UCI email, and if you need it, I can give you my personal email as well. And I really do encourage you all to stay connected with each other, because at the end of the day, as emergency managers, it's a small community. We get to know each other, and it's collaboration, and we get to help each other out. So that being said, I will open the floor for questions, comments, concerns, and whatnots.
Hey, Todd.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you always know that I abhor a vacuum. I'll suck all the oxygen out of the room when I can. Did we go over, was it last class, we talked about the New Zealand Time Bank?
Yes.
After the Christchurch quake?
Yeah, not in this class.
Okay. No, I mean in the social impacts of disaster. Yeah, it's a great example. One thing that we keep on going back to in this class and others is that there's all these unforeseen interactions in the secondary and tertiary impacts of a disaster. And I think it's futile and folly. I think it's a worthy goal, but I think it's futile and folly to try and figure out how you can create an SOP for every possible contingency that can go sideways. And so because of that same weakness in the interconnectedness of things, I think, kind of paraphrase what you're saying, one of the biggest strengths is to focus on interreliance, where normally that would be a weakness. It's almost a fallover response for something like a time bank or people in the community that are relying on each other. You know, you talked about the guy out on the beach that had the concrete house that was the only one standing while, you know, all the rest of them around him. Well, he's only as strong as his 25 neighbors are without a house that are knocking on his door.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can get some portion of the community to be self-sufficient, interreliant, helping hold each other up, I think you're just doing a whole lot investment-wise to make the response so not necessarily easier, but more effective and efficient. And similarly, I think we need to start thinking about different parties and stakeholders that can pitch in. And you talked about, you started to talk about the fact that so many people are reliant on a single source of income or a single skill set. Well, there's a lot of companies there that have huge liabilities in Southern California. If you're in Northern California, disaster hits, they just don't have workers going in. So there's an absolute upside to their investment into disaster preparedness for their employees out there. And if you want to look at it from a simply selfish point of view, from a corporation, they want to keep the populations consuming. So the quicker they can get a community back or a region back to some type of sense of normalcy, the quicker their income level is going to come back. So even from a selfish shareholder basis, on a corporate standpoint, there's a lot of mileage that we can get in looking at some different ways in paying for planning and subsidizing some of these things too. I love talking about them.
No, absolutely, I agree with you there, and I think that's one of the reasons why, if you take a look at your Chamber of Commerce as a entity that can help out with getting things back to normal quickly, right, and helping and having them as a pool of people, as a pool of organizations to do things like, you know, for instance, you know, down the street here, they put easy ups, not easy ups, I'm sorry, circus tents, whatever you want to call them, party tents, up down in the middle of the street, in on Birch Street, and so they closed it off, which is something that was a smart thing to do anyway, and so everybody could get their food and eat outside still, right? And so they paid for that as an organ. The city didn't pay for that, right? The chamber or whatever, the association paid for it. So doing things like that, I think is smart. And again, you're absolutely right. It's selfish, right? In the sense that, well, it's selfish because, you know, as I'll turn on to Francie for this one because her background in economics. I mean, the idea of making money drives the idea but then when you make money, you're able to pay your staff, right? And then, I mean, you talk about the cascading effect of having a store close, right? You know, I closed my restaurant down. Well, then obviously this people that work for me aren't making money, but neither are the suppliers of the silverware and the napkins and the meat and the, you know, the bar with the beers and all this other kind of stuff. They're all losing money as well. So, and if you cascade that down the way, that's how we go into a recession pretty quickly. But what's your opinion on that as far as the idea of selfishness regarding making money during, you know, for crisis recovery?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think that it's, and that's why I actually think that why economics is such an interesting field to study is because it kind of overlaps with so many different things and people are very motivated by it. So I definitely think that it's a really good tool to use when kind of trying to create incentives to get people, like you said, to do things that they want. If you can get them to see that those actions that they're taking will eventually help their bottom line, even though, you know, it's potentially they're laying out money in the short term. But yeah, so I definitely think that that's a really good idea. I also think it was really interesting some of the stuff that you're talking about before about, you know, creating economies and industries that are anti-fragile. And I guess because I'm super fascinated by that topic in general, and definitely was taking a bunch of notes on those books you're talking about, want to look into it more. Because I guess for me, I'm curious if you think that that can be applied to every industry, or is it more just about getting, you know, building that where we can? Because there's certain things, I mean, I guess you could argue that, you know, the restaurant industry being able to pivot to takeout and being a market versus, you know, and selling other types of goods rather than just being a dine-in only establishment, things like that, like, I guess do make it more it is actually anti-fragile because then it creates resources, like local resources for people to find goods and stuff. But I guess I just am wondering if there are certain industries where it's not really possible and how we could bridge those gaps as well.
Well, I'll start with the restaurants for a second because when this COVID thing first broke, um, the Lazy Dog Cafe or is it called Cafe? Lazy Dog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one. It's a chain store. It's just a bar restaurant, kind of folksy, sort of like woodsy type of decor. You can bring your dog there. That's why it's called Lazy, right? So anyway, they were selling take-home kits. You could buy eggs, milk, butter, toilet paper, things like this that they were putting together as a kit. Instead, because people couldn't get eggs, milk, butter. If you guys remember when we first were in that part. So yeah, so they pivot, yes. And that's a corporation. It's not a small corporation, but it happens to be something staples that you need. Now, yeah, I mean, there's going to be winners and losers in all these things, right? I mean, obviously the shock company, for your vehicles. I mean, I don't know what can they do. I mean, that's All American Tires. I mean, they sell tires. I mean, I don't think they can really pivot too much. I mean, everybody needs tires for the vehicles, but I mean, you can't really pivot that one, but I mean, there's things at some point they're gonna have to come back and people are gonna have to get tires for the vehicles, so there are certain things that just doesn't work that well. But the idea though is if they say like the All American Tire Company, for instance, they're all of a sudden they're short on time, but they have vehicles, say even if it's tow trucks or whatever, that could actually pivot to be delivery vehicles for like DoorDash type thing. You know what I mean? The people, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there as an example, right? If you were a cleaner, like a laundromat type thing, or not laundromat, but a dry cleaners, right? You could do more than just deliver your dry cleaning to the people. You can actually start doing things where you can bring food and water and stuff to them to be part of that process to increase your footprint, and then when things go back to normal, you decrease your footprint back to doing what you're doing normally, right? To what you do best at. But I mean, that's just the idea of it, is like, if you can add that stuff, because, Brian's store he's never delivered food before, but he still makes, Chinese food or whatever he makes over there. And then he's able to talk to his buddy, the laundry, the dry cleaner, to deliver food for him. So that's the type of stuff I'm talking about, having those conversations. But it only works if you're having these conversations prior to an event, right? And that's why, like, Chamber of Commerce is, that's why those service organizations, that's why those things are really important, because each other, not as, hey, Brian, the guy who owns a Chinese restaurant, and Todd, the guy who owns a dry cleaner's place, but it's, hey, Todd and Brian, and we, on Wednesday nights, we all meet at the Chamber of Commerce and talk about life in general anyway, and, watch the soccer game or whatever that's on TV. You know what I mean? So there's that community is being built. And I think that's something that, I could be wrong, but I believe that some of that's missing a little bit.
You're right. And Todd, we talked about this last session, and I got a bunch of people looking at me like I was crazy. You have to have a community identity before you can have something that can rebuild itself, or even more important, figure out where they want to be in the future, post-disaster or not. Mm-hmm. And they're all and what you're talking about is trying to figure out how to make sure people are aware of non-price incentives in local resiliency and overlap. And the Go Local phenomenon is a great example of that. There are huge non-price bound incentives that encourage that type of local investment redundancy in direct and indirect benefits, and induced benefits too, from non-purchasing disbursements, from tax base, from employment down the line for construction and related areas, beyond just the fact of the people that are actually working in the stores and the service industries themselves from day to day. And I think that's a great opportunity for all of us to not talk about just the acute impacts of working through this stuff, but talk about the long-term kind of psychology that goes with people believing that there's more to the community than just the balance sheets that might seem to be directly accessible. It's more of a long-term investment on who you want to be and who you want there that I think are just as important a question.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, people choose. I mean, there's various different reasons why, like obviously employment and things like that happen, but people choose to live where they live for various different reasons, right? Whether it's family, whether it's because it's where they're born, that's part of it too. But I mean, like for instance, I'll give you an example, personal example. So when I moved out here, um, it was a clean slate for me. I mean, I had an employment issue. I mean, that's what I say, employment issue. I had to live within the bounds of where my job was. But I mean, Southern California, living an hour away from your work is not a big deal, especially when I was working 24-hour shifts. So it didn't really make a difference. So we looked at different places to live before we chose to live where we lived, and we chose the community where we lived. I mean, my wife went to college in the town, so that had a little bit to do with it. But we're thinking about Pasadena. We looked at South Orange County, but the drive was a little bit long for us. We looked at other different things, and we landed where we landed, because we liked what the community stood for, or what it looked like, and all the kind of the amenities that were there. So, choosing the community, I think is important, as well. Right. And I think that when you take a look at choosing the community, I think in some cases that, economics plays into it, right? I mean, what can you afford and things like this. But I think if you create a community that has a reputation of being that community, whether it's small town or whatever, people would want to live there. Right. There's a reason why people are drawn to places. So, and I think that, and as far as businesses coming to those places, I think they're drawn for different reasons, and that could be one of them too. So you're right. Prior to disaster, and it doesn't have to be about dollars and cents either. It could be about the idea of, I think it's kind of neat that, well, we didn't do it this year, obviously, because of COVID, but, in our city, we have the city hall and we have like this big Christmas light, tree lighting ceremony, and everybody comes together, and there's like, it's a huge event. I mean, the police are out there having to direct traffic. I mean, like all the parking lots are full of people, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. Right. I mean, that's a huge event. And the kids are all singing Christmas carols and stuff, and and every little school is out there doing their thing. It's such a cool community event, and things like that really bring the sense of community together. And kind of going back to what I was saying before, I should say I think. Well, the reason why I say I think, because I haven't done, this is the way my thought process is. If I haven't done the empirical study on something, I can't say it is. That's just and if I haven't seen an empirical study, like data that comes in front of me, says this is what it is, and that's why I go into the idea of I think. But it's gut, and it's what my what I've experienced, right? Is that these communities that do that seem to fare better in disasters. I've seen that. Elizabeth, you're quiet today.
No, this is great. I mean, this is just such good, I guess, thoughts on just like resiliency within communities. And I totally agree. I think just like the idea of this like more like hyper local approach is really like the way forward. I see that a little bit like where we live. Like we live in a neighborhood, we live in the city of Boston, but in a neighborhood, about 5 miles of downtown proper. And it is very like, we have like the Greek fish market and the bakery and, the little gift shop. And you do see people that come together, like after a snowstorm of like helping neighbors out. I think that's like, it's really a really like profound impact in a positive way, because I think that's missing. But I just wonder, like, okay, so like, what are the people in the bigger cities doing then? What are they doing in downtown or places there people are coming into work, but they don't actually live in those communities then? How do you build resiliency when you have, I think especially just from in California, just my experience of living there, of like very much like commuter type towns, right? Like people don't always live where they work or work where they live. It's just something I think about as well, because I'm definitely like on board and a proponent of like the local approach to building up that resiliency, like neighbors helping neighbors.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two parts to that. Like, so New York is a good example of New York City is a good, and like Boston too, right? Is a good example of things being broken into neighborhoods, right? I mean, when you say you're from New York, everybody goes, "Oh, whereabouts?" And they're like, "Oh, Upper West Side, Lower East Side, Chelsea, freaking whatever," right? All those things, and so the idea is that's kind of there, right, in those larger cities. And you're right, there are people that are coming in from New Jersey and from Connecticut, and we saw this on 9/11 when people had to try to get home however they got home, walking across the bridge or the right. So you're right. I mean, that does exist. That's going to exist everywhere pretty much. I don't think there's a way to avoid that today. um you know but that being said, today I spoke about on my podcast, disaster, or I'm sorry, business continuity today. I spoke about the 1872 horse flu that started up in Canada and went all the way into Central America, and and that was the engine driver or the horses, literally, right? I mean, horsepower. Um, and so realistically, the economy just shut down because of that. Well, that got people thinking again. It was a fragile system that was based upon one, it was mules and horses. Both of them got the flu, very sick, and so the system was based upon those. Even so much that the Boston fire of 72, the reason why it was so bad is because they didn't have horses to pull the heavy fire engines to the fire, right? So we have these things, we have these, and that's the other thing of it too, is we have to look forward. And I say this a lot, and it's a term I use a lot, and I hate the fact that I sound like a broken record at times, but the concept of leaning forward, right? And when I say lean forward, it's not saying doing things necessarily. It's looking as emergency managers, kind of putting the Nostradamus hat on, if you will, right? And looking to see in the crystal ball of what potentially could be coming down the line. So we talk about the idea of COVID, and people were like, "Oh, this took us by surprise." It didn't take us by surprise. This particular strain took us by surprise. But how many? We talked about this before, right? I mean, we've had pandemic flu plans in our planning process. Mark, you alluded to the fact of SOPs for everything. You can't have SOPs for everything, but you can have a general outline for everything. Not everything, but for the all hazards approach to disasters, right? So we had the flu plan, right? Which should change that just a pandemic plan now, right? But the idea here is we're always fighting the last battle. But we saw this coming. We saw this coming with H1N1. We saw this coming with SARS. We saw this coming with MERS, right? It wasn't like something that surprised us. All the CDC, all the epidemiologists were like, yeah, it's just a matter of time before we have something that just strikes through the population. So leaning forward is going, yeah, this is going to happen. But the problem is that now we have to go back to the whole concept of preppers, right? Or the other side of it too is encouraging, right? Encouraging, like whacking them with a stick on the head, the city council members to do stuff and to put money into this. And then they say, "Oh, this is an area that we don't necessarily want to put money into because of various different reasons, and everything's money tight," right? But ask any of those people if they would not insure their car, or their home, or their boat, or whatever else they have, right? People buy insurance all the time. So basically, what we're talking about is an insurance process. So the cities have to be prepared. The cities have to take that lead aspect of being prepared, and then you have to also encourage the communities to be prepared, right? And those commuters, right? Those commuters should be prepared as well. And inside their vehicle, they should have a kit with them, a get home bag, if you will, or whatever. If you use that term, the bug out bag is, goes back to the whole prepper thing, but like the get home bag, right? I made sure that my wife has a kit in her car whenever she goes out, that she wears high heel shoes and whatnot, and in that bag I make sure that there's sneakers and some food and some water and whatever else. And she thinks it's overkill sometimes, but she had a car breakdown one time, and she was happy that she had her little kit in her car. And I'm like, see, I'm not crazy.
How about a paper map? Teaching your kids how to read a paper map.
I had Thomas Guide. Yeah, absolutely.
figure out a different way to get home.
You know, so I mean, these things can be encouraged, you know, in a way. Now, this is the part that I'm always struggling with as well, is when we talk about these things, and we're doing it right now. It's we talk about it in the scary sense, right? Like, oh, you might be stuck. You know, Elizabeth's going to be stuck riding her bike in a snowstorm. You know, that's terrible. You know, so you should have your snow boots with you just in case. Well, yeah, I mean that's probably true, right? But there's also ways to do this where it's not a fear factor, right? Where that we're not doing this and based on fear, but we're doing this based on, you know, you don't buy car insurance because you fear being in an accident. Well, some people are forced to buy car insurance, depends on where you live, right? But I mean, you're not buying that insurance based on the fear factor. You're just in case, right? No one goes around to you and says, if you get in an accident, you're gonna have to pay millions of dollars, and you know, it's like, hey, you know, you might have to use it, you might not have to use it. I mean, you know, Progressive commercials are funny. Right? The what's the Allstate guy now? Not Allstate, the Jake, you know, the oh my gosh, farmers, not farmers. Yeah, the farmers are funny. All the insurance companies today are funny, aren't they? Like, have you seen like a serious insurance company that's out there? Like, I haven't. You know, I'm just trying to think of all the insurance ads that are out there right now. They're all kind of silly, right? You got the guy with the emu, you got Flo with the Progressive, you got the guy with the deep voice. Although his are probably more serious than, forget that guy's name. That's a Progressive too, I think, isn't it? Right. Anyway, they're all just silly commercials. My point about it is they're selling insurance not based on fear. Could we sell preparedness based not on fear? Eric brings up a point. He's over there being nice and quiet. He brings up a point regarding some of the TV shows, stuff like The Walking Dead, right? Which is, I'm not a big zombie fan, you know, like the zombie movie guy. But a friend of mine says, hey, watch The Walking Dead and put the idea of disaster preparedness into your head when you watch it. And I watched it with that mindset, and I was like, whoa, that's a complete different way of looking at things. Right. And I actually freaking fell in love with the movie or the TV show. Right. So can we sell the idea of preparedness without using fear? Anthony, you're in the media.
I mean, go back to the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So I think a good way to get things across is fear. I mean, scare people with their pocketbook. Hey, if you don't have this insurance, it's going to hurt you financially. So I mean,
does Flo do that?
No, they do put a light twist on it, which is really good. You take away the fear and you make it fun, and you make it in a lighthearted and a welcoming business model.
I mean,
I think is a really good way of doing it. I mean, we just saw today with the text message. It was a fear mongering text message. Wear your mask or you're going to get sick. It was not a welcoming message for us to get.
So, but could we do a different messaging?
I think so. Yeah. If you had I mean, this is real funny here. You had the right marketing agency on it, the right marketing minds got behind it and made it fun. Because I remember in the last class I talked about it, I had a billboard outside of my house, and it was a zombie. It had the cast of Zombieland, but it was a CDC billboard about being ready for any type of emergency you have. And it was not fear mongering. It wasn't anything like that. It was a welcoming message. So I do believe that we have the right minds, you get the right people behind it, is doable.
I think it's also an interesting idea in terms of just making it be a thing that's kind of like an expected level of kind of like what you're talking about, Todd, about like car insurance. Like everybody has car insurance. Like you just get car insurance and duh, you know, it's like, I mean, yeah, you have to think about it. Yeah, you have to do stuff, but it's like, it's a little bit more of an expectation. So it's just like, this is just a thing we do. Like, of course we have a bit of extra supplies on board. Like, you know, have a pantry at home, have supplies, have extra toilet paper, you know, and have that just be more of an expectation, potentially also with a lighthearted nature. But I think, yeah, I think changing the way you talk about it could definitely really help.
And also, I remember with the last class, when we watched the videos on the school kids in Japan. I mean, they start at kindergarten, and none of that is fear related at all. It's conditioning. And you're teaching it to 4 and 5-year-olds about, hey, when the ground starts shaking, you do this. When the water recedes, you do that. And you're starting at a very young age. And you're not scaring them about it.
I have never told my kids that they had to be afraid to be prepared. They just are. And it's a little different. I mean, they live in my house, right? So they see me and they kind of, they always, they emulate I can't even say that word today. Imitate your parents, right? So, yeah, I mean, we have like, they have their earthquake kits and stuff like this. And, my little one has her backpack that's, by the bed and whatnot, right? But none of them have ever said, oh, well, when the earthquake happens, they kind of, the little one gets a little scared, but like any other kid, but they're not fear to paralyze, right? So, maybe it's just something that if you're right, Franzi, if you bring it up since they're little and just say it's, hey, it's just something that we do, it's not out of the ordinary, that's a way. Thaddeus, what do you think? How do we make it? How do we make our messaging more friendly, more, Jake from State Farm than, you're going to have your face chewed off by a shark or something like that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. This entire conversation, I kept thinking back to growing up and camping all the time. And that's why I'm prepared. I'm always, a prepared person, because that's what camping is, right? You've got all your stuff in one spot. You're good for a few days. But I don't think we're going to say, hey, everybody, go camping. But maybe we could.
Maybe we should.
Yeah. And then everyone's got their camping supplies and it's just becomes second nature. You don't even think about it. It wouldn't be everyone, but it would boost the population if more people got outside more. It would boost some of that preparedness, I suppose.
Sure. Michael, you're quiet today.
I would sort of talk about like the inconvenience of being unprepared. So everything's a lot harder if you don't have that can opener or you don't have extra batteries or maybe a change of clothes. And it's sort of, at least for me, it feels good if you're prepared because you're like, aha, I do have it. And I don't have to go through all that, trying to bang a can on a rock to get it to open or something. Sort of like, I don't know, it's a weird analogy, but I sort of relate it to like the A-Team, where I don't remember his name, but the lead guy, he says, oh, I love it when a plan comes together. So
Hannibal.
That type of feeling where it's like, oh, I love it when I'm prepared and I don't have to, I'm sort of like, I don't have anything.
The A-Team. Wow, what a reference to pull out the A-Team.
Michael is now my hero.
Mine too.
Yeah, like the A-Team, really, Michael? What's next? You're gonna quote Chips? You're gonna talk about John? What's next?
Johnny Gage and Roy DeSoto. Oh my gosh, that was awesome! What a pull, Michael. I think we should end the conversation on that one because that's a high note and a half right there. It's like, woo, yeah, mic drop. Oh man, so. Yeah, I think that's our challenges that we really have. At the end of the day, the response is sexy, the recovery is long. On the preparedness side of what we do and getting people to really do this, because as it says, $1 spent in preparedness saves you 7 on recovery. That money that might even go up. And so it is like an insurance, if you will, if you need to sell it to your city council on that aspect of it. It is the idea of getting your community ready. And for every person that you have that's ready, it's one less person that you have to worry about during the response. And so, all right, I'm going to shut this off. I'll stick around for a little bit longer if you guys want to chit chat for a little bit. And everybody else, take the test, take your final exam. Don't forget that. And if you guys are working on where somebody owes people who owe me stuff, get that in after this class. I think it's a week I have. That's a wait period, and then I have to get my grades in pretty before the end of the year. So before Christmas. So if you owe me stuff, I'll keep it open as long as I possibly can until I start getting those emails telling me that I need to get my grades in. All right.